Hello there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. Okay, so today's podcast is a little bit special in that it's, I think, my first formal listener request. I don't know if you're aware because I didn't announce it anywhere, but a few months ago, I added a space on my website. So if you go to like joanchanmd.com on the like home page and you scroll down, there's a section where you can send me questions or podcast topic requests. Um, and I was so excited that somebody submitted something on there. If you ever are like, gosh, I wish that Joan would talk about this, but it seems so specific or whatever, like that is a place you can submit. In this case, the person chose to submit it anonymously. And so you have that option as well. Or if you'd actually like not it to be a podcast request, you just want me to answer your question, you just put your name on there and I'll answer you back. But in this case, I was excited to see someone submitting a request and I wanted to take an episode to answer it because I think there's something here probably for everyone who works in healthcare in some respect. And so I'm just going to read what they wrote. The the prompt on my website is something like, "What's the thing in medicine that's burning you out?" Something like that. And so the thing that they wrote back was being on call, even just phone call from home, having to be available any second for a page, especially when that page is for something that should wait for Monday morning when the clinic opens. I love the specificity of this example. Specificity is everything, by the way, like really thinking of like what are like the small details, and they don't often feel small, but the things like, if burnout comes as a death of 1,000 paper cuts, like what are the wounds that you notice most often? And in this case, um, yeah, this particular kind of call and how that leaves someone more drained or more frustrated or more annoyed or like whatever emotion it is for you. Um, I really appreciate whoever it was that submitted this response. And I know we can all benefit from exploring it together. And that's what I want to do with you. So I thought I would answer this question, or I would speak to this prompt, and kind of speak through the different scenarios in which people can be on call. So the one that I personally experience most frequently is being in an on-call clinic, which is sort of this interesting thing where sometimes there's even a couple patients booked in, but otherwise it sort of acts as a walk-in clinic. My particular on-call clinic, they call in and have some amount of triage and then are booked in. I know some of you may work in more like a pure walk-in clinic style, like whatever that case may be. So I want to touch on that kind of being on call. And another component of that call system for me is this home call, like this person's mentioning, where in theory, I could be getting calls about patients outside of that clinic time. In practice, in my particular setup, it doesn't happen that often, but I've certainly experienced in the past, like in training or with locums, ones where it is more frequent that I'm getting phone calls. And then I do also want to touch on what it's like to be on call in the hospital. And in all these cases, I'm not about to share with you the definitive way to like never feel bad being on call, because I don't know if you've noticed with this podcast, I'm not interested in telling you the definitive way. I'm going to share some of the things that worked for me. Doesn't mean they're going to work for you. We're all humans and human in bodies, so there's some things we'll have in common, but the particular things that you need, I'm hopeful that by sharing some things that have helped me, it can spark a question in your mind of what could be helpful for you, right? And I would say the thing I want to sort of state overall is like, what is it about the on call mode that feels good or bad to you? Whether you're on call in a clinic, on call by phone, on call in hospital, what about that feels extra taxing versus the rest of the work you do? Um, because there's a bit of that is um logistical that then we plan for. And there's also a bit of that, which is story we're telling ourselves about being on call, right? So when I think about like, what is the somatic, the embodied sense of being on call? Um, it's almost like you can't relax because you're on call. At any minute, someone could interrupt whatever you're doing and then force you to do something else, right? That's almost what it feels. I'm not saying that's what we think in our heads, but it's certainly what we feel in our bodies that like, I have to stay on alert because I'm on call. Like there's something even like the language of it, like, what does on call even mean when you think about it? Like, I'm the next one to be called. And if one is to call me, I must respond. So there's this sense of your time's not your own, even your body's not your own, right? Does any of that resonate with you? That's certainly, especially the way I used to feel when I was on call, where it's like, well, if I'm on call, I have to always be ready to be called. I have to feel tension in my body. I have to feel, poised to respond to threat. And that is draining, period. That takes energy away from you. That that energy and muscle tension and thought process, like the bandwidth you could be spending doing something else or even just relaxing, instead is going into this like what if kind of mentality of like, it could happen any minute, it could happen any minute. You're like on the edge of your seat, right? So whichever setting you're in, I want to offer that like embodied sense of being on call, if that's the way you feel on call in your body, is that like, I have to be on alert. That's something to get curious about and really wonder if it could be optional. Because the thing that's interesting is whether you're on call or not, disruptions happen all the time. Have you noticed that? And I mean, related to work or not, right? Like you can be having a day, you could be on vacation and you get a call that's surprising about, I don't know, your basement flooded back home or something, right? Like unexpected interruptions, unplanned for disruptions happen in our lives all the time. And for a lot of us, actually, maybe because of our upbringing, maybe because we have a bit of underlying anxiety, maybe because of experiences we've had in the past, whatever it is, some of us feel that feeling of being on call for anything. Like, if any of you are parents, there can be the sense of I have to be on call in case a kid calls me, you know. A version of it you can think of, like helicopter parenting, like when you're with your kid, you feel like you always have to be on call to jump to whatever it is that they need. And you have to be kind of thinking ahead of all the possible bad things that could happen and everything they could need from you. And so you have this hypervigilance. That's a word, Does that resonate as something you feel in your body when you think of on call? And so first of all, notice that whether you're officially on call or not, how often do you have that feeling in your body anyway? And so there's something about like when you're officially on call, does it feel worse? Does it almost feel better? Because at least you know that you're going to be interrupted and life's not going to be so smooth, right? Like get curious with yourself. Like, does it feel better or worse when you're on call? For that reason, is it that it's like, at least my hypervigilance is legitimate because of the setting I'm in, and really thinking, what are other ways that I could feel while on call? And I'm not saying that because they're morally superior. I'm not even saying that it's not about health or that they're better for you. Like we're not trying to like shame the fact that right now you might feel that tension, that hypervigilance. That tension, that hypervigilance is there to protect you, is there in your body to protect you against a threat that your body perceives may happen. In this case, an interruption, a possibly stressful situation, right? So it makes sense it's on alert. And what could help you to find a way to view less of the whole situation as a threat so that you could feel the way you want to feel on call? How would you prefer to feel on call, right? Like, is it that you'd want to feel like super incandescently happy about being there? Maybe. Is it that you'd want to feel calmer? Just feel more like in the zone, go with the flow, flexible about whatever comes your way. Like think for yourself, how is it that you'd like to feel? What would feel better to your body that therefore would make it so it's at least energy neutral instead of draining, maybe even energizing at times? What's a way you could view being on call that would allow you to feel that way, right? And I think so part of it is expectations, right? So when you're on call, whether it's in a clinic setting or hospital setting or home setting, expecting that your day is going to have interruptions or things that you haven't planned for or surprises in it, that makes sense, right? So is that something we have to be fearful of, or is it something that we can simply expect and understand is going to happen and almost be a state of acceptance when it comes, right? And like I said, we'll have good experience about how to accept unexpected things when they come because we do it all the time. I mean, part of what I want to say is on call is a state of mind. And really, whether you're officially on call or not, things are always going to fly at you when you least expect them. Right? So any notion that our brains have that like it's different when we're on call, I'm not saying like, probably you will get a different number of phone calls when you're on call versus not, right? The volume, depending on how it is for you on call, will likely be different than times when you're not assigned to be on call, for sure. And that's where logistically we plan around that, right? So we don't try and like do a very detailed project that needs a lot of focus and concentration at home when on average, when I'm on call, I get this number of phone calls, right? We like plan our day differently. But before we even do any of that planning, I think just knowing that like on call is a mindset. It's a state of mind. And so what shift would you like to make to your on-call state of mind that can help it feel a bit more peaceful, that can remind you of the power and control you absolutely do still have? Because I suspect for many of you listening, and certainly for me, the sense of being out of control, like your time's not your own, is something that makes on-call feel somehow worse, right? And so I would invite you to really reflect on that for yourself. What does on-call feel like to you? Is it a thing that's a problem for you or not, right? Um, so, and I'll just share right here for me, speaking of the setting I'm most commonly in, excuse me, I used to feel like the call clinic was really stressful. I didn't know how many people were going to be in there. It wasn't filled up ahead of time. And I didn't know the patients that were coming in to see me. So I used to be really worried about that. Like, what would they think of me? I'd have to build rapport quickly. Like, what if something really bad was in there? What if someone was really sick? Right. And so I'd be more anxious and kind of dread my on call. I'd also have feelings of like resentment, like, I've been working all day and now I have to be on call tonight. Like I'm working extra, I'm working harder. Now I'm going to be more drained in the morning and I have to do this. This sucks. And so that was my original kind of on-call state of mind, my on-call mindset. And I noticed that was happening. And I noticed that ended up being kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So every patient that came in that had kind of a scary case, I'd get extra scared by. Every patient that came in that I was like, oh, this could have waited for the next day, I'd get extra frustrated and kind of burn my energy through being frustrated about it, right? And then all of that meant that, yeah, I had way less energy the next day and I started to dread on-call clinics more, right? So then I got curious about that, knowing what if I told myself a different story about what on-call could mean for me? What would that change, both internally in terms of just how I view it, but also externally in terms of how do I want to set up my life so that it feels better, right? And so for me internally, the thing that I realized about on call is in some ways it's simpler because I decided for myself the criteria that I wanted to use for myself for success in an on call setting is like, did I do at least one thing to address their immediate concern? And if I did that, success. And so it actually became quite a freeing space. I didn't have the sense of ownership of I have to also make sure their PAP's up to date. I always have to make sure that all these things are up to date for them. Instead, I could just say like, what are you here for? What's your idea? What's your expectation, patient? What are you hoping to get out of it? What are you worried about? My 5 questions, which are like the essential questions for time efficient patient care of any kind. Asking those good questions, addressing those, and then saying goodbye. And they'd bring up like, oh, this or that or the other thing. And I'd be like, we're in the on-call setting. And I'm just here to address that one concern. That sounds like something really important. That sounds like something so important. I definitely encourage you to bring that up with your regular family doctor. Right. So you notice that there was 2 things in there. So first, my my mindset of saying like, I'm here for their immediate concern. And actually this is quite liberating. I get to address one thing and do the next right thing for that thing and then let them go. Catch and release, like fishing, right? It became so clear to me. And because of the setting, I felt more empowered to set boundaries that I was definitely still struggling to set in the rest of my practice. So as you said, like externally, something that then that shifted was that I was able to more clearly set boundaries and not address all their things. Because like, no, this is the on-call clinic setting. I'm teaching the patients how to better set their own expectations for on-call clinic setting. And for me, I felt empowered to do so because thank goodness for this on-call clinic setting, that now my on-call state of mind is actually empowering me. And now it's something I can look forward to. So I'm like, oh, it's so quick and easy. It is like walk-in clinic medicine's like the way I think of it, like zip, zap, zoop, like, and then yes, those sound effects, very official. I feel like I'm going from one person to other to the next, focusing on that just like pressing concern that brought them in tonight only. And then I can release them back to do the good to their, regular family doctor, even if that regular family doctor is me, see you another time when we have more space to really dive into everything else that you've brought. For today, it's actually like a very focused, singular concern that we're dealing with tonight, right? So that's how I shifted the mindset, right? And so that already really changed my whole energy towards what made me frustrated or not, what made me anxious or not. If someone came in, and I had a patient not too long ago, came in, fever, tender right lower quadrant, I'm not freaking out. I'm like, listen, I can't rule out it's not appendicitis and it's the evening. You get to go to emerge. And yes, did I have some of the emotions that I sometimes have about like, what if it isn't? What will the emergency doctor thinking of me? Sure. And I'm here to address their top concern and do the next right thing that makes sense to me, which in this case would definitely be going to emerge, right? So I get practice making quick decisions. I get practice setting clear boundaries. I get practice with all the stuff that it's harder for me to do in my general practice setting. And I just like fine tune those skills because I'm putting on this different like on-call doctor hat. It ends up being something that's helpful for me. So you see how I like totally shifted my mindset. Excuse the sniffing, by the way. I'm still like recovering from a little bit of a cold. And so that really shifted the energy that I had around on-call clinic at all. And then the other thing I did, and actually not just me, but other members of my setting, is we noticed though, being on call equals, energy expenditure. And a lot of us were feeling like, wow, we have this extra thing on our plate. A lot of us think of on call as this extra thing, right? What if we stopped viewing it as this extra thing? So if I am working an additional 4 hours in the evening, one of the options is I can choose to, instead of adding on, if I know that my body's capacity, my mental capacity does not do well with adding an additional 4 hours on after I've already been working all day, what if I make a schedule change? So every time I'm on call in the evening, I take those 4 hours away either earlier that day. So some docs in my office would rather be working less that same day. Others were like, I'd rather take the next half day off, like the next morning, I'd rather have off to recover. Everyone found their groove, but we realized we don't have to be treating our on-call clinic as additional thing when we already know our regular working hours is already like enough. We're already maybe over our capacity or just at our capacity with the things we have planned through our day. Okay, well, we all have on-call duties as well. So what if instead of making it an extra add-on thing, we include it in how we plan all of our work? Because being on call is part of our work. So it gets to be added and included and not like, oh yeah, I work blah, blah hours a week. Oh, and sometimes I work on call. Like those hours get to count, right? And so that's the thing I was thinking would apply across all the different settings, right? And hopefully help sort of logistically, if you start to think of your on-call setting in these two important ways. So one, instead of thinking of it as like, this is why being on call makes me feel more helpless and less in control and more like at the mercy of everyone who's coming through the door. And instead saying, When I'm on call, I get to put on a different hat. It's like putting on a superhero costume. Like when I'm in my on-call clinic mode, this is what I get to give myself permission to do. That might be different than what I struggle with in the rest of my work. But if I'm on call, this is how it's going to go. And now you're in this empowered place where you're like, this is how I do on call. And this is how on call can feel good to me. And then you get to like kind of play a role that you otherwise would struggle with and use it as a secret like skill building session that then if you want, you can start like sneakily applying to the rest of your work later. So that's that first set of strategies. And the second set of strategies is, are you treating on call as if it's bonus work? And what if you never had bonus work, but instead it's just work? And therefore, if you know what your max is for the work you can do, what's going to give? And you will feel feelings of guilt or obligation or whatever because of it. But what if you're a human being in a human body? And just because you happen to be assigned on call a certain week doesn't mean your body has different needs. So what do you need instead? What post-call, pre-call setup can you do to your work? Small changes at a time, if that feels more realistic to you, so that when you start to see that it's your turn to be on call, you may feel feelings about like, oh, it's going to be something different, but you don't feel this huge dread, understanding it's going to be this huge drain on your energy setting, right? So yeah, I thought like those are one of the two big things I wanted to say. And then I wanted to kind of talk through what makes sense for me about how they apply to the different settings of being on call. So for the call clinic setting, I feel like I've sort of addressed it already, right? So basically, every person that comes in, I ask them what their most pressing concern is. I do the next right thing for them, and then I let them go. One thing I've found very useful is to not have as many expectations of what is and isn't appropriate for on call. And I'm just saying this as a suggestion, only in I have found that it didn't serve me because here's the patient still in front of me. And if I'm mad at the patient or I'm mad at whoever triaged it, here they are still in front of me. And what if their pressing concern, even if it's more of an emotional pressing than a physically pressing, how could me doing catch and release with just that one thing still be of service to the general healthcare system, and not basically not burn myself out more? Because if you've noticed, if you try and help a patient sort of under duress, if you are trying to help a patient that you're very angry at because they shouldn't be here, it feels terrible. It makes the appointments last longer, typically. You don't always like focus on what's happening in the room. Like it doesn't feel as good to you. So I just like offer as an invitation to question, like, yeah, it automatically happens where you're like, really, you're here for a stub toe or whatever. But really getting curious about like, so tell me more about why that felt so important for you to come in and see me. And then you deal with it and then they're gone and you've dealt with it. And then it doesn't they don't have to stay with you. That's something I see. I used to feel this way, and I still see like colleagues and friends where it's like, oh, this person. And it's like, I get why we do it. And I'm certainly not shaming the emotion of having it, but like, it means that that person who didn't understand that on-call clinic wasn't for a stub toe or whatever, or their, birth control renewal or whatever, now they're still with you. And now they're like stuck to you and you're still carrying them the next day, days later. And now we're resentful of, now we start creating stories about how that family doctors should have better accessibility. Now we're actually like viewing the rest of the healthcare system with more frustration and suspicion. It makes it all harder versus like, listen, it doesn't mean that you address the 5 things. I may not even renew the birth control. I probably would renew the birth control because I think it's important. But like, say they come in, they're like, oh, actually, I have 5 things. I need my screening blood work. I just haven't been able to get into my doctor and I need all these things. I'm not going to take that all on. I'm going to use my on-call physician superhero outfit to say, I'm here to help you with whatever's the one pressing thing that's brought you in tonight. And I will say, just for clarity, sometimes I address more than one issue, but typically, there's typically not more than one pressing thing that needs to be addressed that night. So the one issue only kind of rule that gets bandied around as bad or good or whatever, I personally find for the on-call clinic setting, it works quite well. Not as a strict rule. I don't have anything as a strict rule. I'm a big fan of flexible boundaries that feel whatever feels good in my body to hold for this person is what I get to decide to hold, you know? And so if they're coming in with 5 things, you say, you know what, this is the on-call clinic setting. So I'm here. Let's pick the thing that's really distressing you the most tonight. And then we can make a plan for you to go back to your regular physician and address the rest, right? Practicing those boundaries. But I'm not holding in my body anger towards them for not knowing that. I don't know if you've noticed, but lots of people just really have no idea about how healthcare systems work. Lots of people, every single person we see is the star of their own story, the main character in their own movie, and all those movies are very different. So I find it helpful to allow them to continue to be the main character in their story, whatever that means for the role I'm playing in it, right? But instead, I'm just saying, hey, there's the one thing we're going to do today. Let it go. So that's what I'd say. That catch and release idea is the main thing I wanted to say about, say, call clinic settings, right? And then if you're near the end of the setting and there still seems to be people who want to see you, but you're nearing the end of your time because you're in your on-call superhero outfit, when you're done, you're done. You get to decide that. And so either you start turning people away or you turn off the phones, as happens in my setting, right? And you have done good work for the people that you serve in that setting. It's very clear. It's very defined. I'm like really pitching like, oh, guys, on call. It's clear and defined, and you get to actually decide exactly how much care you want to offer because it's kind of decided for you, and you can decide exactly how much of that you want to take on per patient. It can be a real place of liberation. Okay, if you could tell, there was like a bit of a pause. My nose was filling up so much and I had to blow it. So I paused so that you didn't have to hear that. Okay, so that's a call clinic setting. Next, I want to talk about this home call, which is the thing that listener originally like wrote in about doing the phone call from home. So you're at home. In theory, you could be doing things at home. You could be, you know, washing the dishes or doing the laundry or going out with your kids or going out with your friends, right? And you're also have this phone on you or pager or whatever it works in your setting that could be ringing at any time. And I hear that in what the second sentence is that the person wrote in, having to be available any second for a page. So that bit, just to name that bit, right? So that's going back to that hypervigilant sort of state of mind of I always have to be on edge. I have to be available any second for a page. And so I think right now, if that's ever a setting you're in, let's really question if you're in a setting and if you're supporting a portion of healthcare that involves call from home, double check if it's actually true that you have to be available any second for a page. So when I think of the things in healthcare where it is a good idea to have humans that are able to address a concern within seconds to short minutes, I would suggest that those not be parts of the healthcare system where the healthcare human is at home. I'm saying, I don't, hopefully it doesn't sound condescending, but like really think it through, right? Like, so what is it? Codes, like code blues, things where people are going to be bleeding out fast, like things I would imagine it would need to be hospital setting, right? If emergencies happen in a home setting or like out in the wild that aren't in a hospital setting, it's not an optimal system to have it be a single clinician that's on call and hope that they're close enough that they can come and do CPR on your person at home. And that's why we don't have that set up. At least where I live, you call 911. And also, how long does it take the paramedic to get there? Is it an any second situation or is there time? So this is where even on call, I want to offer you one of my favorite mantras, which is timely, not urgent. Timely, not urgent. When I'm in a home call situation, I do make sure my ringer's on, for sure. I do make sure my phone's near me. Yeah, absolutely. Does this mean that I don't, I don't know, take a shower? No, because I'm aware someone will call me. And if I don't see it immediately in the second that it comes in, I can call them back in a timely, but not urgent manner. That just changes everything. It still means, yeah, like I kind of said before, I can plan that weekend to be a weekend that I'm not going to be doing something that I would really prefer no interruption. So, say I'm planning to go to a wedding and I don't want to have my phone on me. Say I want to see the newest Star Wars movie. Are there even Star Wars movies anymore? I have no idea. But I want to go see it. It's in a movie theater. It's like I probably won't plan to do that on a weekend I'm on call. And if I feel like rats about that, that's not my favorite, that's totally legit, right? But I'm going to make sure, like on a weekend where I am meant to return calls in a timely manner and I'm going to have calls related to work, I'm probably going to have my phone on me. Depending on the setup, like I'm probably going to have a computer near me if I need to like look up stuff on the EMR or hospital system or whatever would work for you, right? But it shifts the dynamic to shift from saying I need to be available any second for a page to I'm going to be available this weekend by phone and I'm planning to call them back when I see that they've called me, or if I happen to have a free moment, I will answer the call live. This could mean like say I'm in like a really heated conversation with my husband and I'm like, this is important to me. And then my phone rings. For me to, say this was like a really important conversation, I would turn off the phone. I would let it go to voicemail, have the conversation, and then call back, right? Like we can still prioritize the things that are really important to us above answering the phone, even when we're on call. Probably not for hours and hours, but if it's going to take another 10 minutes and then you can call them back, you can wait till you're off the toilet, or whatever it is. You can wait till you pull off to the side of the road if you're driving and you don't have a hands-free setup, like, right? If that's actually one, like, you're like, I hate when I get calls while I'm driving because I want to take notes on what they're saying. So what if you never took calls while you're driving? Instead, you made a plan. You're like, okay, oh, I got a call coming in. So I'm going to, safely when I can move to the side of the road, get out my notebook, and then call them back. You get to set the boundaries with your phone when you're on call that help your brain and your body feel best. And this is not just like so you can feel good in a quote unquote selfish way, just so you feel good, though that's a great reason to do it. When you feel good, you feel calm, you feel relaxed, you're ready to receive the information from the person who's calling you. You're also going to provide the most thoughtful, nuanced, complexity holding answer to their question. So even if the person on the other end of the phone is quite anxious, which I don't know if you notice in healthcare, but a couple of us have a little problem with anxiety, and that's okay. We're all working on it. But you can have people like, I've tried to call you 3 times. And that's because they tried to call you 3 times in 5 minutes while you were parking your car. You will have more space to hold for them if you took that time to do what you needed to do, to get out the notebooks or open the computer, to be ready to call them back and say, oh, wow, it sounds like this is something that you're really worried about. Why don't you go ahead and tell me about it? And we'll work through it. And you'll have time to do that because you are regulated, right? And so that I would suggest is sort of the frame of mind and timely but not urgent mantra that I would offer to you, and let me know how it goes. Like if you do home call, does that kind of thinking help you, right? Calls in the middle of the night, right? Like it's something to think about where even if you know that the way your brain works, you need to get at least 2 hours of uninterrupted sleep. Would it make sense based on how your healthcare system runs and the kind of calls coming in to actually have like full do not disturb for at least 2 hours in the night? I don't know. Like, could you actually talk through with your healthcare system of saying, listen, like, is there any way you could hold calls if it's after a certain time? Could you hold calls to a certain time? And I say that only because I know that this sort of thing does happen. I remember when I was giving birth to my first son, I decided halfway through the labor that this was really ouchy, and actually maybe I would prefer an epidural if it was going to take some time. And the thing they let me know is actually the anesthesiologist has already gone home for the night, and the next one will be here in a couple of hours. And at that time, I had like emotions about that, but I also like respect that I mean, that happens. I'm just saying it happens. Like if you think there's no way I could possibly, I'm like, it literally happened to me. So clearly it happens in healthcare. And I'm not actually here to argue that it shouldn't have. In the end, then labor progressed and I just didn't even need an epidural. It was fine. But like, it's interesting. Like, what if our healthcare system really honored the needs and bodily capacity of the people who are supporting the other humans? And that could apply to you too in the home setting and in the hospital setting, which is the one I want to talk about next. But the last thing I wanted to mention in the home call section, especially since this is the main thing that the writer wrote in about, is like that, especially when the page is for something that could wait till Monday morning when the clinic opens. So this is where you get to have the most empowered approach to setting boundaries. So when you're on call, so that it's not even like a person in front of you, right? So if is it a patient that's calling you, or is it a nurse that's calling you? It depends on who it is. But if they're like, oh, so someone's calling in and they need this thing, one of the things that you could say is no, right? So even if it's a patient, like if you have a system where it's actually the patients call you directly and they're like, hey, I just need this thing, maybe hear them out if there's a reason. Sometimes things where you're like, they're leaving on vacation. Does it make sense? Think it through. It's fine. But if it's something where it's like, you know what, actually, you're going to get better, more thorough care if you call on Monday, because you're going to get that full appointment in person to do that. And that's why it's a good news story for you. They don't have to believe it, but you can believe it because it's true. Hey, this is something that is actually way better served if we do it during the week. And I am unavailable for that particular concern. Beautiful boundaries. They feel hard to practice. They are uncomfortable to practice. But what if when you are on call at your house, already sacrificing your ability to go see the Star Wars movie or whatever it is you'd have normally done that you've chosen not to make yourself in a timely but not urgent availability to your patients, what if you get to decide how much of that you take on? And if you feel the feelings of the annoyance and the anger, I'm not here to like shame that those come up, but like, what if you actively practice setting the boundaries and notice that over time, that means you get less mad at it? Because the reason that we feel so mad is because we think they're forcing us to do something we don't want to do. But when we tell our bodies, we are in charge, we get to decide, no one can force us, that is when a lot of that frustration and anger is able to sizzle, because our bodies don't feel like, hey, we're being forced against our will. We check in with our will, we check in with our autonomy, and we say, autonomy, empowered body, sovereign form that in which I live, is this a concern that I want to address in this setting? Or is this really a concern that I want for me and this patient? It just really makes more sense that it's gonna wait till Monday. And then we start practicing saying that out loud and noticing that we're all okay. Noticing that there's maybe some emotions that come up, but otherwise everyone's fine. I think that will potentially really help this person in how you're viewing your on-call. And if not, submit to me again and we can keep the conversation going. Okay. Okay, final scenario is if you are on call in a hospital setting, right? And I don't think I have much additional to add. Obviously, you don't even have the option of trying to do laundry in between. In some ways, I don't know, when you are on call in the hospital, those of you who do hospital call where you're like staying over, how does that feel? There's things that are going to be physically maybe less comfortable. You're in a bed you're not used to. You may be up all night. Like, I know there's certain kinds where you're planning. Basically what I'd say is, probably, especially in the hospital setting, plan, not hope, like plan for it to be as bad as it could be, in the sense of like plan. It makes sense to plan for not sleeping at all. It makes sense to plan for having many, many consults coming in, so that if it ends up being a quieter night, it's a bonus versus kind of hoping to get things done when other stuff is getting done, right? Because all you can do is like one thing at a time anyway. And even in this setting, how much of what you're being called to do is still timely, not urgent? And you'll know because the urgent ones you're not going to even question. You're going to be like, code blue, I'm going, or whatever. It's like trauma coming in, drop everything else. Everything else was clearly only timely and not urgent, And I know there can be scenarios, especially with under-resourced places, where it's like there's multiple actually urgent things going on. And that's like when the moral distress really kicks in. So I just want to honor that. And you were one human. You're going to do one thing at a time. You're going to do it to your full ability and give it your all. And then you can move on to the next. That's just like, those are the physics of being a human. So in some ways it can get real clear, especially in these sorts of settings. And the same clarity can apply to all other settings as well. You're going to do one thing, you're going to do it to the best of your ability. You're going to catch and then release and move on. That's all we can do, right? And then beyond that, the main thing I'd say is, especially if you're doing, 24 hours in the hospital, is there any way to discuss if that's, I just don't think our bodies are designed for that. But maybe your body is, and if your body feels fine, that's good. But certainly at least like full post-call day, like how can you start to advocate and shift how post-call all works so that you can honor your body's need for rest and downtime in the midst of this all? How can you make sure that you plan for the yummiest snacks while you're there or whatever it is, right? Like how can you really like knowing that your body is going through something that can be quite challenging and is out of your typical setting, and you probably wouldn't invite yourself to, catch 30 minutes of sleep in a dinky on-call room. So how can you make that experience as like lovely as possible considering the circumstances? And I'd love to hear more from someone who works in that setting, if I've kind of got it right, or if there's factors I haven't thought of, right? So, yeah, those are my on-call thoughts. So to summarize, what is your current on-call state of mind? Like, what is the current way that you view and approach on-call? And is it serving you? Is it helping make that experience at least neutral, if not somewhat net positive for yourself? And if it's not, that's for understandable reasons. You didn't like do it to yourself on purpose. But if it's not, what would make sense to shift so that it can at least get to that neutral, if not positive way of like maybe even looking forward to it from time to time, or at least viewing it like, this is not my favorite part of my job, and this is how I make it an okay part of my job. This is the stuff I put around it, the boundaries and the way I view it, so it feels okay. I just heard the other day of someone where it's like they hired someone additional to come help them with their on-call, and that helped them make it feel better because they didn't like doing it alone. I love that. Like, that's like, how can we start to shift even the structures around it? What choices are available to you so it feels less trapped? You feel less stuck in something you don't like, because that's when the dread resentment cycle continues and just serves nobody. It's not good for you not even in the health sense, but just like doesn't feel good to you. And if it doesn't feel good to you, honestly, like it won't feel as good to your patients. And I say that we're not responsible for how it feels to our patients, but like, especially for anyone's like, I can't make changes because that's all the patient need. If the things that feel good to you, and the way to set up any part of your work so that it feels good to you is the pathway to the best feeling patient care. It just is. So if you need to take that route where you still can't do it for yourself, do it for your patients, because it's going to feel better to them too. It will. Last thing to say is, if you want additional support with this, whether it's about on-call or anything where you're like, I don't even know what my body needs or how to make it feel good, I would really invite you, if you're listening to this when it comes out, it should be coming out the week before, my newest workshop that I'm co-facilitating with an amazing embodiment practitioner, Jamie Lee Finch, October 24th at 8 p.m. Eastern, and it's called Body to Body Medicine. And it's really like examining this notion of what relationship do we have with our body? on call and sort of up all night and disruptions and interruptions are some of the settings that can feel, we've often disembodied ourselves and the system has disembodied us. So we are disconnected from how it feels in our body to do this work. And beautifully, because it's sort of in some ways the most extreme or different from other kinds of jobs, those are the settings where we can really come back into relationship with our body and notice how that shifts our experience of it and also shifts what we need to change about it so it can feel good for our body and we can be really in a more loving relationship with our body. So I would invite you to come to that workshop if you haven't registered already. Links will be in the show notes tonight. And then if whether or not that workshop is of interest to you, if you want a scenario to be covered on a future podcast, you can go to joanchanmd.com and you scroll to the bottom of my homepage, submit your request. I would love to do more of these. I found it really fun to have this scenario just given to me and then for me to talk around it. It's been a pleasure to think through and share with all of you. That's it for me. So may your next on-call adventure be a bit easier and more peaceful, timely, not urgent. What kind of on-call cape do you need to have on to practice some of those boundaries and see how it feels a whole lot different? All right, take care.